we have for the first time in the human race a possibility that we can take a big step forward in the quality of our consciousness. I started working on trying to understand what reality really was like. I suddenly realized that I could derive quantum physics from my understanding of consciousness. Why do you have an Akashic record? Well, it's a necessary database for the system to render this reality. Now, that's a really big paradigm shift for most people to get over, that this is a virtual reality. Our bodies are avatars. I have multiple times connected mind to mind with somebody who was dying and followed along with them through their death process. We're starting to get to the point where people are looking for that other dimension. There is only one truth, but there's many thousands of ways to approach that truth. The scientists will embrace this theory as a better physics, and when they do, they are what I call the high priests of Western culture. I was in my 20s. I kind of lost the day-to-day contact with the non-physical from 7 to 25, 26, something in there. And I had gone to a transcendental meditation course to learn how to meditate because it promised that I wouldn't need as much sleep. And as a graduate student, that was a problem. You had these big generators that accelerated particles, and when those things were running, which wasn't all the time, it was very complex machines, then you took data, and that means you maybe stay up all night or maybe even a couple of nights with other people helping you. So that was my motivation to go learn meditation. Meditation was very simple for me. I just got it instantly. And about, a couple of months later, after meditating, I think the prescription was twice a day for about 20 minutes, I was thinking about the work I was doing, the computer code I was writing for working on my PhD thesis. And I had a problem with that code. It wasn't running. And those were back in the bad old days of punch cards. And there was no debug software, the only help you got was that the machine said, your job bombed. That's it. That's all the information you got. You didn't get where, why, anything else, just that the computer, some reason, quit. So debugging was a very difficult process. And I was thinking about my lines of code, and then I kind of saw my lines of code that were like on a scroll. They were just rolling down from the top. And I noticed that some of the lines were red. Most of them were black. And I wrote the code, so every line was familiar with me because I'd put every line there. And I got the idea that those red lines were the ones that had problems in it. They were the errors that were bombing the computer. So, next day, when that was in the evening, I go up to where my desk was in the accelerator laboratory, and I start pulling out those cards that had the red on them. And sure enough, I found errors on most of them. But one or two of them, I couldn't find any errors on them at all. So I left them in and they bombed. So then I just repunched them. I just repunched the cards and it ran fine. And what was wrong with those cards is that the holes in the punch card weren't precisely where they were supposed to be. Now you could look at it, but you couldn't tell. This was like a fraction of a millimeter off, but the computer could tell that it was a fraction of a millimeter off, and that's what was bombing the job. So it wasn't some clever, subconscious awareness of mine or anything else. This was giving me information that was impossible for me to know, that couldn't anywhere be in my subconscious, because when you punch the buttons on the key punch, it doesn't give you feedback about how accurate it is. I mean, you just punch a button and a hole appears in your card. It's a mechanical machine. So for me to get that information of which cards had their holes punched in the wrong spot, that was a big mind blower. So what scientists do is they model reality. They try to understand how reality works. And this hit me like a ton of bricks, because I thought, well, there's another whole part of reality out there that has to do with awareness and consciousness. that I don't know anything at all about it, but I'd like to. So from then on, I had this desire to learn about, consciousness and what it could do and what that reality was like. How did it work and why did it work that way? And what could you do with it and what couldn't you do with it? So I kind of puzzled about those things, and I practiced with my own consciousness and learned to do some other things. But then I got out of graduate school, went to work, and my boss threw a book at me and said, "Here, read this and tell me what you think." And it was Bob Monroe's Journeys Out of the Body. So that's a weird thing for a boss in a technical outfit to throw at you. But there was evidently a bunch of people where I worked that were interested in Bob Monroe's work. So I read it and I told him what I thought of it. I said, well, if this guy is just making stuff up to sell books, he's got a good imagination. But if he's for real and he's really experiencing all these things the way he chronicles them in his diary, which is basically what his book was, it was just a diary of his experiences, then that's a big wow. That's a piece of reality and a methodology to observe and to, do science in that reality. So about a month after that, boss comes by and says, "We found out where Bob Monroe lives. He's only about an hour away. A bunch of us have made arrangements to go see him. Do you want to come?" And I said, "Absolutely." So I went out. I met Bob. He had just built a lab for studying consciousness. It's just an empty building. There was nothing in it, nothing at all except, roof and walls and floors. It's empty shell. So he said, "I'm looking for some scientists to help me run a consciousness lab. Would any of you be interested?" And of course, I was interested, and another friend of mine worked the same place. He was interested. So about 2-3 weeks after that, we started going out to Bob's lab, making equipment, wiring it for like galvanic response, that we could track. And then we got some EEG equipment that we could put in it. And so we kind of built the lab up. And then after we spent about an hour or two doing that, Bob would come up, we'd get in the booths, and Bob would then teach us about out of body and about exploring, the nonphysical. So then we do that. And, a year or so into that, Dennis and I took a trip together where the two of us were having an out of body together, and our voices were being recorded on 2 separate lines. And Bob could talk to us via headphones we had on, and he had mics in the control room, and he was taping what we said, our responses, and what he said was all on cassette tape. That shows you how old it is, cassette tape. Most people listening to this probably don't know what a cassette tape is.
There was an A side and a B side, and you had to wind it back.
Yeah. So anyway, Dennis and I had this adventure, and we were supposed to stick together, and we did. A lot of things happened, met a lot of people, saw a lot of things, and when we came back, we were in separate booths. So we were separated by an isolation. We were in isolation booths. There were 3 of them, and he had the one on one end, I had the one on the other way, and the one in the middle was between us. So there was no way that sound could have traveled between those booths. You could shout in one of them, and you wouldn't hear it even in the next one. So anyway, Bob says, "Well, what do you two think you were together?" And we looked at each other and said, "Yeah, it seemed like it." And we both agreed on that. So he says, "Well, listen to this." And he flipped the switches, had both of those cassettes running at the same time, which coordinated them in time. And there it was, Dennis and I, asking questions, getting answers, talking to each other. "Oh, did you see that? You mean that yellow thing that spires up in it? Yeah, that's the one. And see the other thing next to it? Yeah." So we were seeing the same things. We were having conversations, and we were both in our booths, our soundproof booths. My booth actually was a Faraday cage. It was also no electromagnetic energy could go in or go out. So that was the thing that also hit me hard, and that said, well, you can't explain this in any other way other than just exactly what happened. So after that, I stopped asking, is this real? Up until that point, I was saying, well, it's something going on in my mind, and I've got lots of evidence that I've been doing things that are impossible, like remote viewing and healing, and we'd practiced all those things that were evidential, and we were getting pretty good at it. So the statistics said that, we were really doing something, 1,000 to 1 kind of statistics, that we were just good guessers, so we were doing real stuff, but I got that on an intellectual level, that it was real. But this thing with Dennis then hit me at more an emotional level. It's real. Not just that I think it is because we've got good statistics, but it is, and I know it deeply. There's a difference between getting something at a deep core level and getting it at your intellectual level. So that was kind of my introduction. After that, my job as the physicist was to figure out how it worked, come up with a theory, come up with some idea of what we were doing and why we were able to do it, and what were its limitations, and where did it come from, what was happening. So that's what I did. I started working on trying to understand what reality really was like, because there's obviously this physical component that we call the physical universe, but there was another component in mind that was just as real and just as valuable, and you could do a lot of things there that you couldn't do from the physical, and you could do things in the physical that you couldn't do there in the non-physical. So I would spend, the next 35 years going into these spaces and changing a variable and seeing how that variable affected my ability, so remote view or to heal. And I do that a bunch of times, and then I change to a different variable, and I do that a bunch of times. That's the way science is done. It's very time-consuming, and it's rigorous, but it's just slow, plodding work that you just try all the variables and see what variables are sensitive, which variables are not, which variables don't seem to make any difference at all, and eventually, understanding that, you get to come up with an idea of what's going on, what causes what, how things work. So I had this goal that I could put together all of the facts that I had learned about consciousness. Like, one of the facts I learned about consciousness was it's fundamental. And I knew it was fundamental because from a state of consciousness, from when I was in the consciousness realm, I could fix things. I could change things here in the physical world. But from the physical world, I couldn't fix or change anything in the consciousness world. So it was obvious that the arrow of causality went from consciousness to the physical world. So consciousness was prior to the physical world. It was more fundamental than the physical world. And there was a lot of other data points that confirmed that idea. So I just discovered these kind of ideas from all the repetitive work that I was doing, trying to understand how it worked. And then in 2003, I published a book that kind of gave the results and conclusions of all that study. It was basically a book about consciousness. What is consciousness? How does it work? How did it get the way it is? How did it start? What's its evolution? Was it always that way, or did it grow? Did it evolve to be that way? And of course, it evolved to be that way, like everything else. So that's the only assumption in my book, is that consciousness exists. I start there, that consciousness is, which is not too crazy an assumption since we all believe that we're conscious. So it's not too weird of a place to start. So anyway, that's where it started. And then about two years later, after the book was published, I published all three at the same time. After the books were published, I got an aha moment, kind of triggered by a friend of mine, and then I suddenly realized that I could derive quantum physics from my understanding of consciousness. I could tell scientists why quantum physics says that at the bottom level of reality is probability, not matter. And that's, of course, the big question mark in quantum physics. That's why it's weird science. It's not matter-based. It's probability-based entirely. And then I realized why it was probability-based. So then I started thinking, wow, I solved that one. That's the kind of the biggest mystery in physics that there is. What about relativity? Well, the big thing in relativity that is a kind of a fundamental assumption, but they don't really know why it's like that, is why is the speed of light a constant? The speed of light is always a constant. If you have a flashlight and it goes it's traveling this way and you turn it on while it's traveling, you just get C. You have the flashlight going backwards the opposite way and you turn it on. The light that comes out is still going C. Doesn't matter what the source is doing. It always goes the same speed. We call it C. It's just the speed of light. And I then thought about that only for about an hour, and I figured that one out. Oh, that's obvious. I know why that has to be that way too. So then having derived quantum physics and relativity, the fundamentals of those, the sciences that make them the way they are, then I went on to other things, and I found that I could explain logically all the paradoxes that were in physics and then philosophy and even theology. I could explain these paradoxes, and it also had a lot of logical consequences for sociology, psychology, and the soft sciences as well. So I spent the next 20 years after that trying to find exceptions, something it didn't explain. I asked for people to tell me, is there something that you think that it doesn't explain? And after about 20 years of searching, didn't find anything. So I figured that instead of a theory of everything, it was the theory of everything. There really wasn't any other solution that would answer all the questions with a smaller number of assumptions. So it's just a logical model. It's science, just like Darwin's theory of evolution is science. You notice Darwin's evolution theory is not based on a lot of deep mathematics. It's based on observation. He observed things and he saw patterns. Oh, look at this pattern. You look at a dolphin's fin, and you'll see finger bones. You don't just see a bone that comes out and is spread out flat, but you see actual bones that look like this with knuckles and joints and everything. Oh, how did that happen? Well, Darwin's theory said, well, that's an exception. That critter started on land or moved to land and then moved back into the water. So it's an air breather living in the water. Anyhow, that's kind of my trip and where I got to where I'm going. I did a very quick run over that. There's a whole lot more detail there, but that just kind of gets your audience.
I appreciate the context.
How I got there. I looked for a single overarching explanation that would explain everything, would explain all the paranormal things, it would explain consciousness, and it would explain quantum physics and relativity. So it needed to explain the physical world as well as explain the world of consciousness. And one of the things that came out of that, not only a better, more general physics, but also a theory of the subjective world. We have, theories of the objective world. That's what we call science. But then this also creates a theory of the subjective world. So are you struggling in your life? Are you unhappy? You're miserable, overcoming one obstacle after another. Well, there's a reason for that. And this model can tell you what that reason is and what you need to do to find happiness and feelings of personal success and personal accomplishment. So that's, in a nutshell, kind of who I am and the journey I've taken and the stuff that's out there. So I've probably just created at least 1,000 questions in your listeners. So let's just go there.
Inspired soul, lumen being, I wanted to take a moment to thank all of you that have subscribed to this podcast. Everything you see around here, guests like Tom coming onto the podcast, is all enabled, made possible by your subscription to this channel. Thank you so much for your incredible love and your support. Thank you, thank you, thank you. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the button below is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon, and join the community, join the movement, spreading love, positivity, and wisdom like this around the planet together. And if you want to dive in even deeper, remember there's the Inspired Evolution Circle. You can join us in community. We gather once a month for guests like Tom to come answer questions directly of you. I step out of the way, and it's guests answering questions directly of the audience. audience once a month. And there's weekly meditations, weekly prayers. We connect together in community circles. There's community offerings like Reiki, meditation, like all sorts of stuff is happening on the inside in the inner circle. Come join us. At the time right now, we're celebrating hitting 250,000 subscribers. Thank you all. And in the spirit of that celebration, we're giving away access to the circle. So use the link below, inspiredevolution.com/circle. Use the link below and join us in the circle on the inside with the community. I'll see you there. Well, it's interesting because one of the key things in there is you've created a logical, way to understand it all, like this is my big toe, the theory of everything. But then also what's being highlighted here is logic's only half the equation. What do you label as the other half of the equation? You've called it paranormal in some ways. What do you call the other?
Well, it's all logical. You just have to understand the structure behind it. The paranormal is also logical. I can explain what the mechanism, how it works. You've probably heard of the Akashic Records. Oh, there's this database out there that everybody can get data out of, your health and your spiritual body and all that sort of thing. But nobody knows, well, why is that data out there? Who put that data out there? How did it get there? How does it get updated? Well, my model explains it. It explains where it comes from, why it exists, and so you understand what it is.
Could you unpack that example for us, like the Akashic Records, why they're there, who put them there, what's going on?
Yeah, well, okay, you'd have to know a little more about my model, but this model basically comes to the logical conclusion that this thing we call the physical universe is actually a computed reality. It's information-based, and quantum physicists have been coming to that reality for probably 20 or 30 years, that this reality is information-based. That's not that new in physics, but they didn't know how to take the next step after that. Oh, okay, so it's information-based, now what? And they weren't able to take the next step, but then this explains it all. So if you realize that this is a virtuality computed within consciousness, the larger consciousness system, that's the big system of consciousness of which we're a part. That system can configure a part of itself as a computer because consciousness is really an information system. Consciousness takes input. Okay, we think we're conscious. What are we conscious of? Well, we take input from our five senses, right? That's data input. We take that data and we process it. We compare it to what we knew a little while ago. We compare it to what we have in memory. Then we process it a little more and have an output. What are we going to do about what's out there? So think of consciousness. It takes in data, processes the data, compares it to memory, comes to a conclusion about what it wants to do about it, and has an output. Well, what does that? Has input, processing, memory, and output. Well, that's an information system. So consciousness is best modeled as an information system. So if you look at it that way, then it's not a big problem for the larger consciousness system to configure a piece of itself as a computer. And in my model, I have really good logical reasons why it would want to do that and what the point is and so on. But just for where we're going now, in order for it to run this virtual reality, in other words, it has a rendering engine. All virtual realities have a rendering engine. That's just what they call the piece of the computer that makes the pretty pictures that we look at when we play a game. Well, this rendering engine needs some data about what the possibilities are of the things that could happen next. What's possible? What could happen next? And then what the probabilities are for each of those possibilities. So there may be possibilities that are like 0.9 or 0.99, and there may be possibilities that are 1 in a billion or 1 in 10 million. So all of that, all the possibilities and all the probability of those possibilities go into a database for what's likely to happen next. Now, it's not that the future is programmed. It's not. We have free will. But there's possibilities and probabilities for what the future will be. That's the database. And as that database gets older, the things that were in the future go to the present, then go to the past. So then what you have after a bit of time is also a database of everything that could have happened and the probability it would have happened. Now that then has a thread that runs through it, which is what actually did happen. What choices did we make? So think of this reality being computed. That means every tiny part of it is understood by the system. Everything's computed. When things are computed, you only compute what you need. You don't compute things that nobody can process. You only compute what others can process. So me, looking at you now, then a vision is computed of me and what you look like and headphones on your head. But it doesn't have to compute that there's a brain inside your head or a heart inside your body or lungs or livers or kidneys or any of the rest of it. None of that is computed. You are just a piece of eye candy computed by the larger consciousness system so that the players who are pieces of consciousness know what's going on the playing field, just like any other virtual reality game. When you play, The Sims, it's a virtual reality. Well, those Sims characters don't have lungs and hearts and circulatory systems and brains. It's as if they had those things. It's just as if they had a brain. So they seem very intelligent, but the player makes all of the choices for them. That's the player's role. Now, our bodies are avatars, but we are really a piece of consciousness, the player who's making all the choices for us. So it's that individuated unit of consciousness that's talking to you right now. And it's your individuated units of consciousness that's listening and taking in the information and thinking about it. Same with all the other people who will listen to this. So that's how the reality fundamentally works. So why do you have an Akashic record? Well, it's a necessary database for the system to render this reality. Now, that's a really big paradigm shift for most people to get over, that this is a computed reality, that this is a virtual reality. But think about it from the prospect or from the vision or the viewpoint of, say, an elf in the World of Warcraft. If you're an elf in the World of Warcraft, I hope World of Warcraft has elves in it, I'm not sure, but just go with me there. I'm too old to have played a lot of those games. Anyway, if you're an elf in the World of Warcraft, if such things exist, the world that you're in, your virtual world, seems very physical. You can't walk through doors. You have to turn a doorknob. You fall off a cliff. You get hurt. You stay underwater too long. You drown. It's not because your character was rendered with lungs that you drown. It's as if you needed to breathe oxygen. Well, it's the same way with us. There's no oxygen rendered in the air around you and me. It doesn't have to be rendered because nobody's measuring it. But if you get out some kind of device that can measure oxygen, then that gets rendered too. And if I, have a surgeon come in and open up my skull, well, there's a brain in there. But just as much as they can see, that's all that's rendered. So the consciousness that's making all the choices can only experience what the rule set of this virtual reality says can happen. Same with World of Warcraft. Your elf can't jump up in the air, flap its arms, and fly because elves aren't allowed to fly in World of Warcraft. So there's a rule set. That's where this virtual reality came from. It started from a set of initial conditions and a set of rules, and you know those as the Big Bang. The initial conditions was a tight ball of plasma in a small volume, very high temperature, and when the run button was hit, then it starts to change according to the rule set. Rule set is what we call science, physics, biology, chemistry. So it changes and it evolves, and as it evolves suns and planets and galaxies and Earth and us. We all come out of that evolution. Well, mine is exactly the same, except it's a big digital bang. It's being done in a computer. It's being created so that individuated units of consciousness have a game that they can play that has consequences that are very meaningful. Consequences, like life and death consequences. So you have to make a choice. You're a caveman and you need shelter, you need food, You need to take care of your family, make sure your children survive. You have animals that want to eat you. You don't have any housing that you can move into. You have to find shelter the best you can. So there's a lot of very significant, tough choices that you make. And you see somebody else going by and they have something you need. They may have a bunch of food with them, and you and your family are starving. What do? Well, you have several choices. You could go down and talk to them and say, hey, we'll let you stay in our cave if you share the food. Or you could go down and hit them in the head with a big club and take their food. Now, you've got the food and they don't. So those are the kind of choices you had. And typically, the pieces of consciousness made very poor choices. They moved toward the immediate solution with clubs rather than a longer, more tentative solution with cooperation. So on it goes. So we're evolving here. And the point of our evolution is to become love, to be helpful, caring, cooperative, compassionate. That equates to lowering the entropy of our consciousness. That orders the consciousness, whereas fear, beliefs, ego, all that stuff is a disorders consciousness. It creates entropy. Entropy is a measure of order. So when you have a lot of entropy, you have a lot of disorder. It's a measure of disorder. Entropy is a measure of disorder. So high entropy means a lot of disorder. And fear is a very disordering function. If you're fearful, then you can't trust because it's all about you. If you're self-centered, then you don't mind walking over other people to get what you want because it's all about you. So that side is full of high entropy. It doesn't make things better for everyone. It doesn't pull things together. It is self-destructive, actually, on the negative side. So we're here, logged on to these human avatars, making all their choices, looking at the eye candy that we see on the board, which is this virtual reality, which doesn't actually exist. It's just information. So we're here playing this game with a computer, which is all virtual realities ever are. They're a player and a computer. All the rest of it's just computation. So the player is a piece of consciousness, sends off, I see this situation and I'm going to run, not fight. So then it sends that to the computer. The computer shows a picture of the avatar running away. So then that creates consequences because it runs into something even worse. Oh no, so then the computer, has to compute what you're going to do about that. So it's just the way virtual reality works. And this is a very good virtual reality. The consciousness computer is much faster and much better and has much better resolution than our computers have at the present moment. So that's good. And it seems to have almost an endless supply of bits, which is also good. But keep in mind that all these things I'm telling you are metaphors. The larger consciousness system is a metaphor for source. The individuated unit of consciousness is a metaphor for a subset of that source. Now, when I say subset in computer speak, that's called a virtual machine. Inside a mainframe, you can have lots of virtual machines. That's how a big mainframe can have 1,000 people working at it on different jobs all at the same time. It gives each person a little bit of processing, a little bit of memory, all the things that it needs. And it can do that for thousands of people simultaneously because it just partitions off little pieces of space for each person to work in. Those are called virtual machines. So we're a virtual machine inside a big consciousness mainframe, if you will. So that's the model. And I kind of jumped ahead. I didn't mean to get into all that so quickly. But you asked me, where does the Akashic Records come from? Well, that's where. It's necessary for the computer to render this virtual reality. It needs that information because this is a probabilistic simulation, not a grounds-up simulation. Not from the physics standpoint, it doesn't start with little particles that make up big particles. That's a ground-up. This is more of a top-down probabilistic simulation, just like, say, No Man's Sky. That was the big thing about a decade ago, was the first big, what do they call it, procedural programming game that came out. And it's the same way. It works the same way. It computes everything on the fly. So if you look to the right, it'll compute what you see. And it stops computing what you were looking at. You look back and it'll start computing that and stops computing that. You get in your rocket ship and go someplace, it doesn't even compute that world anymore. But it keeps track of all the things that are on that world. So when you come back, you can see the changes according to time. There's been erosion. There's been, there's maybe mountains now where there wasn't before because of volcanic work. So as it comes back, it just basically goes into probabilistic algorithms and pops up what the new version looks like. And whatever you look at, that's what it sends to you. When you don't look, it doesn't compute. Well, our reality works sort of like that too. So that is now the big, I've just gone through about 3 hours worth of information in about 20 minutes. So I know, drinking out of a fire hose, but yeah.
A blessed fire hose, might I add. This podcast is brought to you by my one-to-one mentorship. The podcast is designed to inspire your evolution onwards, upwards, and inwards. And if you're ready to dive in even deeper and evolve your career, your leadership, and business in a conscious direction, and you believe that alignment to your purpose and your soul's direction is the only way to truly thrive into your highest potential, and right now you can feel that guidance, mentoring, and coaching would be of support, then my one-to-one mentorship coupled with our incredible conscious group masterminds is here for you. Thousands of people have evolved through my mentoring over the last 10 years. It is, after all, my highest calling, and here's what they have to say about how it's transformed their life.
I've had massive transitions while working with Amrit.
I'm processing things in real time. I'm addressing what I want to do, and so much more is possible.
Amrit sessions were really helpful. They inspired me to go after my dream job, which I have now, and I'm loving it.
Amrit doesn't really see it as just coaching, but he honestly cares about you, and you can feel it. That's just priceless. I just love it.
If you're looking for someone to help you evolve as a person, hands down, Amrit.
So if you're ready to dive in even deeper to take your inspirations and truly evolve, then make your way over to my website at amritsandu.com. I'll put a link in the description below. You don't have to go it alone. There's one-to-one mentoring and an incredible community mastermind of conscious leaders, entrepreneurs, and people transforming their careers and business into full alignment with their soul's highest calling, creating a life that inspires them on the deepest level, living into their greatest impact. And as many of you know, connection is my highest value, so I'm looking forward to connecting with you. Use the button below, use the link below, amritsandu.com/call. That's AMRIT, Sandu, SANDHU.com/call. It's on screen for you now. And if you follow that link, you'll be able to book in a call directly with me. I'm looking forward to connecting with you. So go on, I'll see you there. The larger computational system, the LCS, source of consciousness, can I also ask another question, and maybe they come to the same point, which is who created the original rule set? What is the source of consciousness? Because you mentioned the source. Can we find out more about
the source? The source is just consciousness. The source is what I call the larger conscious system. That's the source.
Doesn't that just end up in a loop? Mustn't it have started somewhere?
No, it doesn't end up in a loop. People have trouble with that. They want to end up with an infinite regression. Well, what caused that? Oh, well, then what caused that cause? Well, what caused the cause to cause the cause? And so on back. But it doesn't work like that.
My linear mind would really appreciate it.
Yeah. It doesn't work like that. The thing is that we cannot know what the source of the larger consciousness system was because we are consciousness. And in order to have an objective view of how that larger conscious system started, we have to get outside of consciousness. But we are consciousness. We can't get outside to look. So it's not that we just haven't figured it out and we aren't smart enough. It's logically impossible to look objectively outside of yourself. You can't get outside of the conscious system. You're not defined outside of the conscious system. You only exist inside the consciousness system. There is no outside. So that isn't an infinite regression. You just have to realize that you can't, when you ask a question, well, what created the larger consciousness system, I can answer that as far as I can start with the smallest piece of consciousness possible. I define consciousness as awareness with a choice. Very simple definition. That's it. And I can start with one little piece of one little tiny awareness that has only a binary choice, A or B, 1 or 0. And I can let that evolve, and that will necessarily turn into the larger consciousness system. So I can show you how the larger consciousness system evolved. I can even to point out to some historical physical anecdotes that we have in the, say, comparing the Old Testament to the New Testament in Christianity, how the larger consciousness system had to grow up and learn just like we did. So anyway, those things are all logical. So I start with this one tiny cell of consciousness, the minimum choice, which is just between two things. And from that, everything else necessarily evolves. When I say necessarily, I don't mean, oh, it could have evolved this way. I mean, it has to evolve this way. That's the only options, the only logical options that it can have that will work. So that's how the model works. Now, if you say, well, where did that first little cell of consciousness come from? That's where I say, I just start with an assumption that says consciousness exists. And it exists in that one tiny cell. From there, I can take it all the way up to today and tomorrow. But that's where I start. And it's impossible for somebody inside that system to get out of that system and look back at it from an objective viewpoint. So we are locked in to having no more than conjecture about where that consciousness cell came from. Now, there is some pretty good conjecture. There's conjecture that unites they call cellular automata, which is a thing that has a very small rule set, but can produce very, very complex things from that very small rule set. And another thing that basically says that if you have a potential for something to happen, if you wait long enough, it will happen. And both of those are mathematics-based. And if you put those together, you can have a pretty good argument of how consciousness existed. But then, of course, you'd say, well, where did that potential come from? And now you're right back to where you started. So we can't get outside to see that. So I start with consciousness exists. And so it's not an infinite regression. It just stops there. And the real answer, the only logical answer is, I don't know. Now, I have conjecture. I have ways that it could possibly happen, but I can't know for sure how it ended up.
The rule sets that we have as well that govern our reality, were they developed through evolution on this side of that boundary or on the other side of that boundary and put in place on here?
Yeah, consciousness wanted another virtual reality, and it wanted it because the first virtual reality was just communication protocols. So it broke off little pieces of itself, we call individuated units of consciousness, gave them free will, because then the possibilities of where it could go increased. If it's just one mind, the one mind will only think what the one mind thinks. But if you have a bunch of minds with free will, then you've got an argument. Now you have things that have different perspectives, and the possibilities of what you can make with that is a lot more. In other words, let's put it this way. If you just had one big block of wood, or you had 1,000 little blocks of wood, with those 1,000 little blocks of wood, you could build all kinds of structures, all kinds of interesting things. There's many, many, many possibilities of what you could do with those. But otherwise, you just have one block of wood, and there it is. It just sits there. There's not a whole lot you can do with it, except maybe move it to someplace else. So when it did that, it had all these individual units of consciousness. It created the first virtual reality, which is communication protocol. So these pieces could communicate. They could share information. They're an information system. Well, they evolved. We're evolving toward lower entropy, which is toward love. And I can make that logical if you'd like later. But that's the era of evolution. We can also, because we have free will, de-evolve toward fear. That's another point. Depends on the choices we make. Well, in a big chat room where all you do is communicate, there's not a lot of really consequential choices to be made. it's a pretty plain vanilla environment. So growth wasn't too fast. It picked up some initially, but then it plateaued off pretty quickly. So the system said, I need another virtual reality where interactions are all by the rules. That way, I do something and it changes you. I do something. Maybe I pick up a rock and I throw it at you. Okay, now either it hits you or it doesn't, but now you get to respond. So you pick up a rock and throw it back. And see, we're interacting now because now we have a rule set that requires every energy exchange to follow the rules. So anything I do, an energy exchange happens. If I move my arm, that's an energy happens. I can't move my arm otherwise. Everything that happens has to happen for a reason, for a rule set. And then you have interaction, because now the things that I do affect what you do, because we live in the same environment and we're connected that way. And the things that you do affect other people, and the things that they do affect other people. So the thing I do kind of ripples out from me. It affects maybe 4 other people, and each one of them may affect 4 other people, and each one of those may affect 4 more people. It gets less and less as it goes out. But now you have an interactive system where there's lots of moral and ethical choices by which you can evolve if you make good choices, or de-evolve if you make bad choices. So it created this virtual reality by taking a piece of itself, configuring it as a computer, coming up with a rule set, making up a rule set, and making up initial conditions, hitting the run button and see what happens. Well, the first couple of times, not much happened. It all kind of blew up. It didn't work out very well. So you adjust the conditions, you adjust the rule set, and you do it again. And, I call that the big digital bang. So, big digital bang, take 100,000. It's like the 100,000th time you've tried this. Well, now you've got that rule set so refined and so tuned to each other that it does work better. And you keep doing that. And the initial conditions are so tuned that it works. And guess what? There's a thing that physicists call the anthropic principle of cosmology, something like that. And what it says is that this universe has it's 5, 6, 7 constants and other facts, that if any one of those facts changed even in the 8th decimal place, the universe would be unstable and wouldn't exist. So there's books written about it. There's a couple of physicists wrote a book called The Anthropic Principle. So what that tells you is, how could, say, 8 values, 8 numbers, 8 conditions in our reality, how could those 8 conditions be tuned to each other to 8 decimal places so that if you changed a single decimal place, the whole thing doesn't work? Well, science says all of that evolution has to happen by chance. It's all random. So how do you take something that's a random process and end up with that kind of tuning? It's impossible. So obviously, it's not a random process. It wasn't. It was, okay, big digital bang, take 100,000. It's as it evolved, it refined it and refined it and refined it until it got something that had the stability to last long enough to evolve the kind of characters that would serve as avatars. So that's the way it worked. Now, of course, it didn't have to, tick-tock in things like our seconds. The first bunch of things were almost all just probability, and it could have run through those in huge steps. The delta t time step on that could have been something like millennia. It may have clicked off, 1 millennia after another and just done the math. But anyway, as it settled in and coalesced and started to produce things of value, then it would have slowed down. So physicists call that inflation. That's another thing that we've seen. So all these things that physics has found but don't understand how and why they might happen become logical, necessarily, logical parts of this explanation. So at first I thought this was just a toe, but there is no other way to get there. The physicists will say that this is information-based reality, but they don't know what the next step is. Well, the next step was just too big a step that anybody could take. It was just too big a paradigm shift, and that is, it's information-based. What does that mean logically? It means it is computable. That's what information-based means. If it's computable, that means it could be computed. You say, well, it could be computed, but not necessarily. What else could it be? And there isn't anything else. How else do you get a reality out of information other than a virtual reality? It is computed. Not that it could be computed, it is computed. So that is basically just taking up where physics is now, taking it through this big paradigm shift. And when you do that, suddenly everything makes sense. Everything. Even, why you're unhappy. It all makes sense. The paranormal all makes sense. There's rules that the paranormal works by. For instance, here's a rule. How do you manifest things? How do you heal? Well, this database I was telling you about is required because that's how the rendering engine tells what's going to happen next. Now, it's all based on probability, but as a good feedback to us, we can modify those probabilities with our intent. So if I have an intention for the sun to shine next Saturday because my family's planned a picnic, so I want the sun to shine, then that will bias those probabilities a little bit toward the sun shining. But there's some farmer that really needs it to rain, and he's hoping the next Saturday it's going to rain because that's when he has time to, go out and plant in that rain. So he's trying real hard to move those probabilities. Well, he doesn't know that's what he's doing, but his intent is moving those probabilities toward rain. And you add up all those pushes and pulls from all the people all over the planet, and that's what happens. Now, let's say you happen to learn how to discipline your mind to where you have a lot of push and a lot of pull. You can change probabilities significantly, where most people don't have that kind of ability. So now you get to kind of change things. You can make somebody who's sick better just by changing the probabilities of what will happen next in the future. So that's how you heal. That's that's just the way. It's just the mechanism of how consciousness works. Remote viewing is just getting data out of that database. That database has everything that could probably happen. Now, remote viewing sometimes doesn't work. Sometimes those remote viewers who are really good get the wrong answer. That's because probability is not fixed. It can change. So that maybe was a good guess, but it didn't turn out to be right because things changed. The probabilities are always in flux. They're always in flux. So we got that feedback so that the reality that we see is in some ways a result of our own thoughts, our own quality. So look outside and you see that world and how dysfunctional it is and how greedy and nasty and people don't mind walking over other people to get what they want. Well, that is a very accurate representation of the average value of consciousness quality, the average value of entropy in humanity. We've grown up a lot, but we've got a long way yet to go. So that's our feedback.
It's, I can picture some of the psychics tuning into this episode really finding a lot of healing just happening just by ways of, oftentimes they're fringed out in society and just finding themselves placed within the model and how just the explanation is just so cohesive in terms of that. I just wanted to say what you've just described has been nothing short of profound. Of being Indian, there's this awareness of what karma is, but it's very difficult to explain. Just rewinding the last 20 minutes of what you've just shared has been the most profound sharing for me in terms of the cleanest explanation of karma I've ever come across. There's this piece in here that I wanted to ask about. It seems like free will is actually a pretty magical piece of code at this point that's running through the fabric of the whole thing. This free will piece it's pretty amazing.
It's not really magical. All it does is say, okay, I know I come to some decision point, and I look at all the possibilities, and I see I could do 1 of 5 things. Those are my choices. 1 of 5 things. Now, I have free will to choose which one of those 5. That's my decision space. That's what my free will does. It just makes a choice. I'm a piece of consciousness. What consciousness does is, it takes in the data, it processes, and it makes choices. So
but
now I'm a piece of consciousness.
Sorry to interrupt, but it is also constrained in some way to those choices, but it gets to choose from the choice. Like it's
Yeah. Okay, I'll explain that a little more. So it's constrained to those 5 choices. But let's say there's really 20 choices that I have. The other 15 I don't even know about. I can't comprehend. They're not in my reality. I got another 15 choices that I don't even know exist. Has nothing to do with my free will. My free will just means I get to choose which one of those 5 choices that I know about. I get to choose which one. That's what consciousness does. It makes choices. We all have decision space. Now, the more you grow up, the more you become love. The more you grow up, the bigger your decision space gets. The more you understand. The more you understand and comprehend the bigger picture, well, the more choices you have, because instead of seeing just those 5, you see all 15, because your mind sees bigger pictures, and you get a lot more data. So when you meet somebody and they start telling you about their sick mother, well, you right away can start healing. You can go see the mother, find out what's wrong with her, why it's wrong, how did that happen, and start working on her while he's talking to you. So you can do those things. It's all available to you to use your mind, in a productive way. So that's your free will choices. So now you have the choices to whether heal that mother or not heal that mother, or find out why she had this illness, or where it came from, or why she doesn't have it. If you take it away, is that going to damage her path, because that illness is part of the path she needs to be on? So you can find out all that information and feed that into your choice. So you get a lot more decision space as you grow up. So that's part of leveling up, as it will, is that you get a bigger picture. Your free will now has more choices that it can make. But free will doesn't mean you get whatever you want, or you can do whatever you want. It just means you can choose. And there's nothing magical about it. That's what consciousness does. It looks at the choices and chooses. And then, once you've made your choice, you should learn from it. Was that a good choice? If it turns out to be a bad choice, why was it a bad choice? What was it that you missed? What other possibilities could you have done? And then you grow. So you grow from that choice. If you made a good choice, then you can pat yourself on the back and say, oh, great, that worked out really, really well. That was a good choice. And this is how people grow. Now, it doesn't really matter so much that you make mistakes and make bad choices. What matters is, do you learn from them? If you don't learn from them, then you get a punishment. You know what your punishment is if you don't learn? You get to do it again. You get to try again. That's your only punishment. There's no punishment other than you have to keep working at it until you learn that particular lesson. That may take you 1,000 lifetimes to get past that point, because you're just really boneheaded and just have trouble managing your anger or something like that. So that's you mentioned karma. That's really the foundation of karma. It isn't that, you shot somebody, so now next life somebody shoots you. That's way too simple. It's not that kind of a thing. Is that you shoot somebody, now you just de-evolve the quality of your consciousness. Now you're going to have to evolve it some just to get back to where you used to be. So, but you get to try again. And maybe next time you'll help that person rather than shoot them, and then you'll evolve.
Why do we make de-evolving choices?
Well, we make it because we have free will and because we're not very evolved ourselves. We have a low quality of consciousness. We have a high entropy consciousness. We have to grow. And growing is hard to do because it's not a matter of what you do. It's a matter of what you are. So there's a big difference between acting kind and being kind. Well, to lower your entropy, you have to be kind. To raise the quality of your consciousness, you have to learn to be that way, not just act that way. You can act that way all day long, all your life, and that's civilizing, and everybody around you appreciates it, but you're not going to grow up. You're not going to level up. You're not going to increase the quality of your consciousness by acting. You have to be it. So that means that to grow up, you have to change who you are. You have to become somebody else that is kinder, gentler, more caring, more compassionate. And if you do that, then you're evolving. But if you're not very grown up, then you choose to take the club, hit the guy on the head, and take his food, because that seems to satisfy your need, and you tend to be self-centered, and your need is what's important to you, and other things are not important to you. So then you de-evolve. So this whole evolution thing is a slow process. But the good news is that it's an accelerating process. So human beings have been around, Homo sapiens been walking around for about 200,000 years. That's all. And in those 200,000 years, the ethic that dominated was control, power, force. If you've got power, you've got control, you can exert force, and that's what it takes. If you've got that, then, things will happen your way. You'll be fed and you'll have your needs met. So that was the ethic. And what did that do? That led to like a warlord mentality. The strong dominated the weak. 90% of the people did all the work, and the 10% of the people owned all of the resources. You get that kind of a thing when you have a fear-based society. So then you have to grow. Even within that society, you have to learn to be kinder. Not act kinder, but be kinder. You have to change who you are. Very slowly, we evolve. And we have been evolving. Look back 500 years ago. Just go back 500 years. And what was life like then? It was a whole lot rougher than mean. We think the streets are mean now. It was a whole lot rougher, and those streets were a whole lot meaner than they are now 500 years ago. And if you take it century by century, you'll see every century we progress a little. That next century is a little more civilized, a little more quality than the last one. But the good news is the more you grow, the easier it is to grow more. That's just a fundamental thing. The more you learn, the easier it is to learn more. It's when you don't know anything and you're just really, really, unknowledgeable. You're just really stupid. Then it's hard to learn anything because you don't know where to start. It's real hard. You start as a 4-year-old and you learn your ABCs, and that seems to be a really tough thing to learn. And it takes you a long time to remember that alphabet. And then you learn words, and then you learn sentences. And then you learn to read books. So you can accelerate. The more you know it, easier it is to know more. So we're on this curve, and this curve, let me come across this way. Let's say time is going this way, and evolution's going this way. So this curve doesn't go up much. It goes up maybe just a little bit, but then, you see, it gets steeper until it goes fast. Well, we're right now down here on this curve where it starts to go around and move faster. It's been we've been 200,000 years wandering around here. So, 195,000 of those, we didn't make a whole lot of progress. But now here we are, and we're making more progress. And every century we make more progress. So it's starting to get steeper. And we're now at this place where it starts to turn and go up. So we have, for the first time in the human race, a possibility that we can take a big step forward in the quality of our consciousness. That's possible now. It's never been possible before. Before, we've always had, people who understood. It isn't that hard to understand. I got my understanding by going inward, by exploring consciousness, by growing that way, and I came to the same conclusions the Buddha did 2,500 years earlier. He said this world is illusion. It's Maya. It's illusionary. I say this world's a virtual reality. There really isn't any difference. They just use different words and language. Virtual reality wasn't a concept in Buddha's time. So we mean the same thing by that. So that's, all all places, just about at all times, there are some people who get it and understand the big picture, because you can get there just by going inside and being honest with yourself. So that's happened. But those people have always been relegated to the margins. It's never really gone mainstream and stayed that way. It's come and gone, and it's still there. I don't know how many millions of Buddhists that there are, but it's still there. But it's in the margins. It's not the force that moves politics. It's not the force that moves corporate America. It's not the force that is that's the mover and the shaker of the things that happen here. It's there, but what we need to do is get these ideas out into the mainstream. When we do that, then all of our institutions that are nasty now will clean themselves up. It'll just happen automatically. So I'm skipping huge steps in a single bound here, like Superman. But
I'm appreciating them. As you're saying we're evolving, you almost pointed to something that seemed asymptotic. Like, is there what is the asymptote? Like,
well, it gets faster and faster and faster, and you get to a point where you learn a whole lot. So that means most everybody is a very highly developed consciousness, a very low entropy consciousness. Well, there is a couple of things to say about that. Some of the sects of Buddhism have this idea that the end game is that you return to the Godhead and you become one with the larger consciousness system. They have that as the end point. But that's not the end point. It doesn't work that way. The system got to where it's going because it broke itself into pieces. Having all the pieces go back to the system and making a monolithic system again is not in the direction of growing up. That is a hamstringing ourselves. So what happens is that growing up means you want to help, you care. It's about other people. Now, you've heard these sometimes yogis or other gurus kind of saying, well, I can't wait to get out of this hellhole. This is my last time around. I've grown up, I'm enlightened now, and I can't wait to get out of this rotten place and not have to come back here anymore. Well, when they say that, right away, they're telling you that they're not very grown up, because if they were grown up, it wouldn't be about them getting out of the hellhole. It would be, how can I help? Well, you help by coming back here and being a teacher. You help by coming back and being part of the solution. That's how you help. So you continue to come back as the system improves. Now, there's a lot of options. As it gets to where the curve gets very high, imagine what we have. We have 9 billion people on this planet. What if most all of them were very high quality of consciousness? Can you imagine what we could do? You can take one person, let's say, take one person and they have an ability to heal. We'll take another person that's at the same level of ability, and the two of them together work. Well, the result will be twice as much. It's additive. So you take 10 people in what they call a healing circle, and they all heal at the same time. Well, that's much more effective than if any one of them were healing. It's additive. So what happens if you take 9 billion people who all focus their mind on something? Yeah, exactly. Okay, you want to know what's going on in 300 million light years away? There you are. You see? That information is out there if you want to know. So what could we do? It's endless what we could do. Now, what happens? Does the system decide that what we need is, now that we've made peace with our own species, now maybe we need to make peace with some species somewhere else? Now, after that, after our whole galaxy is low entropy, now we need to make peace with some other galaxy someplace. So it could do that, where it just keeps growing and keeps getting more and more choices. So that's one way to look at it. Or it could be that you get to that point where you've you get on that asymptote where you are a being of love. There's other virtual realities besides this one. This isn't the only egg in that basket. There's others. I've been to more than a half a dozen of those other realities that are physical like this one, but they're just totally different reality systems. They're not in this universe. They're some other universe in the non-physical, some other virtual reality. And some of those are pretty awful. So maybe you go there and start helping them. You start seeding higher quality into one of these other virtual realities that needs some higher quality to help bring it up. So the point is, you always must be active in your desire to help, in your ability to be part of the solution. Because the way entropy works, if you just sit back and say, I'm done, entropy starts to increase automatically. That's a basic one of the rules. And if you don't keep putting energy into the system to lower its entropy, entropy will just all by itself start to happen. So you get people who feel that they are enlightened, they're done, and there's a place for people like that. I've been to a reality, I call it the done reality, and all the people who think they're done and don't want to come back because they're done, they send them over to this place. And what happens, I had to go there like, I don't know, a couple of dozen times because the system sends me around to places to learn things. And it took me a long time to learn what was going on here because in general, it was a very nice place. You know, everybody was friendly and nice and whatever. But after I stayed there a while and got to know things more detailed, I found that there were a lot of cliques. There was a group over here who thought they were superior to that group over there because they had come through a different route and so on. And though everybody was nice, they were starting to de-evolve. They were starting to show ego. They were starting to show beliefs that their way was better. And they were de-evolving. And once they got that, oh, geez, I'm de-evolving here, you know. Well, they got back in the system, back in the reincarnation cycle. And they said, oops, I got to go back. I'm losing it here. So there is a place for people who think they're done. And that usually doesn't take that long before they realize that they're not done. But anyway, that's just that's a digression. So that's the end game. The end game is that there is no end. This evolution is an open-ended thing. It just keeps evolving, and the potentialities just grow and grow and grow.
Inspired soul, lumen beings, this is such an incredibly rich conversation. If you're enjoying it, please do give it a thumbs up and a like on the video. It lets the internet know that videos and conversations like this are incredibly important and you'd like to see more of those. And I'd love to hear from you in the comments below. Tom is also on his YouTube channel. He may just be able to see some of your comments too. What are you taking away from today's conversation? There is so much ground we're covering. I'm really in awe of this conversation. I'd love to hear from you. What were your biggest takeaways? Tom's likely to be back on soon to the podcast as well, and I'd love to ask some of your questions. If you have questions of Tom, leave them in the comments below as well, and I'd be honored to ask them on your behalf. Back to Tom in today's episode. Yeah, and stagnation, and you spoke deeply to stagnation and momentum there, even when you arrive. The continuation of that process. There's, interestingly earlier as well, because I can't believe we're so deep in this conversation. You just espoused such a deep thing that's really nested in my heart, which is like a whole way of being, which is like to be of service. And I got that from being a Sikh, but it's just like a fundamental tenet of being of service. And I can't believe we're just going to rush past that, but we are. You mentioned not going, the process is not to, some of these dharmic cultures say, hey, we're going to moksha and we're going to go back to the whole. And you said, actually, that's not quite it. Using that to sort of go back to in your opinion, what was the initial choice that piece of awareness made? What was the curiosity? Because I have this in my own theory of everything, which is humble, just introduce that. I can't deduce much, but the universe is looking in on itself seems to be this really fundamental thing that I can identify. And curiosity seems to be this really sacred thread. Universe is looking in on itself. If I can't deduce much, there does seem to be this thing about curiosity that is whoa, what was the initial sort of choice that was placed there in your opinion? Have you thought about that? And why did subsets divide from a unified whole?
Okay. There is a there is something prior to the curiosity, and that is this need, this drive for consciousness to lower its entropy. That's the basic drive. And let me explain that in a different way. Let's say you have an information system, and to me, consciousness is an information system. So if you have an information system and all the bits are random, there's no information in it. That's just by definition. If all the bits are random, there is no information. If you order those bits, then that ordering could stand for something, could stand for the number 6 or some concept. You could make orderings, and then you could stack them one on top of each other. You can make patterns. And so it evolves toward lower entropy. We're talking about taking random bits and ordering them. That means lowering the entropy of the system. So this is how it evolves. So it starts out with just a simple choice of 1 or a 0, but it has memory. So it could remember that, well, it was a 1 and then a 0 and then a 1 and then a 1 and then a 0 and a 1. And it can start making patterns of things within its mind and its memory. And then it makes patterns of those patterns. And all the time it does that, if it makes something that then has significance to itself, like discovers numbers. Oh, I have an ordered thing here and an ordered thing there. Oh, look, I have 2 ordered things, and and another 2 ordered things. Oh, look, that's 4 ordered things. And you see, just it can learn math real easily that way. And all of advanced math boils down to addition and subtraction. It's a big computer can do amazing math, but it actually is adding like 6 billion additions every microsecond, and that's how it does its advanced math. It's really a big adding machine. So you have this piece of consciousness, and it's evolving, right? Now, the way it evolves is to lower its entropy, to make more order, to make more patterns. Well, it also means that these patterns have to be significant. It's not just it makes a pattern for pattern's sake. That lowers entropy slightly. But if that pattern has some other value to it, that pattern is a symbol for something else, then you even lower the entropy more, because now that's more information, because the fact that it's a symbol for these, that's more information than it's just a line of things. It's a line of things that make up a wall to a house. Well, okay, now it's got another dimension to it. It's going to make a wall of a house. So as you order these things, they get more complex. And that is how consciousness evolves. If it de-evolves, that means some of that order dissipates and turns into randomness. And if it continues to de-evolve, then you don't have an information system anymore. The information system dies because it's all randomness. So this little information system is sort of like us. It can evolve or die. It can move forward and continue to grow. And it does that until it has created lots of patterns. It probably knows math pretty well by now. It realizes that it can take one of its little consciousness cells, a 1 and a 0, and just go back and forth, 1, 0, 1, 0, 1, 0. And when it does that, now that's a metronome. And it can use that metronome to define a regular time. You always had time, but not regular time. And now you can make sequences of patterns of sequences. And you can make all kinds of complexity. But if it's just complexity for complexity's sake, that's not that useful. It has to be complexity that has meaning, has significance in some way, such as math, that has significance. So that's what drives evolution, is this drive to lower entropy. Now, if you look at biological evolution here on this planet, it's the same thing. You had single-celled things, bacteria, and eventually those single-celled things got together and cooperated and made multi-celled things. Then you had something like a jellyfish that had separate parts that did separate functions. You had millions of little one-celled things cooperating together to make a bigger, more complex thing, lowering entropy. And so on, that evolution goes until, here we are, 4 trillion cells all cooperating with each other to make this thing we call a human being, right? Now, this is all in the the computer. The computer's computing all of this from the rule set. Okay, so evolution always evolves toward lower entropy. Now, I'll talk a little bit about why that is love. If you had a bunch of beings of the similar quality here and another bunch over here, we'll call this the love group and this the fear group, and you give them both a certain amount of space and a certain amount of resources, and then you set them off on their own and let them go. Okay, what do you think will happen? Well, the love group, they'll all get together and figure out how to cooperate to make something that's good for all of them. Because the love group, each one cares about all the others. So they optimize the resources for everybody. What happens over here in the fear group? In the fear group, like I say, fear can't trust because it's fearful. So then it's grab whatever you can grab, fight to keep it, and you and 10 others can get together and take things away from these people who are only 2 or 3 in a group. So now you have groups forming to be defensive, but they're also, of course, offensive, and they take each other's stuff, and these groups grow, and eventually you have nation states just like we do, and you have a bunch of people who don't like each other and are trying to steal each other's stuff all the time, and so on. You have 5% of the people owning 95% of all the resources. You end up with us. That's what happens when you put a lot of fear together. You end up with that. Control, power, force is the ethic. Over here on the love side, the ethic is caring, consideration, compassion. So that tells you that when everybody optimizes, that's low entropy. You've really ordered things to the benefit of everyone. Over here, you're constantly fighting and struggling, and you got some guy who's the big honcho, and somebody else wants to knock him off so he can be the big honcho, and then somebody wants to knock that one off. So there's constant fighting and turmoil, and it's very dysfunctional and self-destructive. So that's where you get the idea that low entropy is moving toward love. High entropy is toward fear. So now we get back to this idea about being curious. Being curious is what happens when a consciousness, which fundamental thing is that it makes choices, has various choices to make. And it needs to put things into memory. It needs to assess its environment with its processing. And it has, what is this? This could be this way. I maybe could use that to help me get food, or maybe I could use that to wrap around my feet. What could I do with this thing? Well, that's a basic functional curiosity. Here's a possible choice. What can I do with this? How can I use this to help myself and everybody else? So that is where the curiosity comes from. It's pushed by this need to find lower entropy. How do you configure yourself, your mind, your choices such that what you do creates the minimum amount of entropy in the long run? So you have to look at the long run for you and the system and everybody in it. So your choice should be a lowering of entropy for the system, you, everyone else. And that everyone else includes dogs and cats and horses and bumblebees. That's everyone else, because they all have little bits of consciousness too.
Can I ask about, there's a real tripwire here, because for many people, going into lower entropy like love, especially the type of people tuning into this podcast, is that's where they want to head: kindness, compassion, love, gratitude. And for those that are in the high entropy space operating by fear, there is this predatory type behavior. And there is this fear for even those moving towards the higher entropy of the predatory nature of fear. And I understand that to very clearly be a high entropy thought for those that are moving towards lower entropy, and it's kind of keeping them stuck in place. But it does actually then happen as well, where takers will take what the leavers will leave. You know what I mean? Like, there is this predatory behavior of the higher entropy forms of consciousness on the lower entropy forms of consciousness at times. How does someone that's orienting themselves towards love trust that they're going to be looked after moving towards that direction when fear has a certain propensity, touch wood?
Okay, that's a good question and very pertinent to our times, because a lot of people right now are very fearful and see a lot of negativity in their world. And how do you live in the realm of peace and caring in a world that is full of control, power, force? Well, the thing you have to do is, one, you have to be aware and be smart. In other words, being fearless doesn't mean being stupid. Those two don't go together. Somebody says, well, if you're not afraid, why don't you jump off this cliff? Well, the answer is, I'm not afraid, but I'm not stupid either. So don't confuse fearlessness with stupidity, right? They are not the same thing. So you have to be smart. You have to be aware of what's going on, and you have to try to put yourself out of harm's way when you can. If that's possible, look ahead, figure out what's coming, and get yourself ready to deal with that. Now, the thing is in life, the way you evolve is stuff happens to you, and you get to deal with it. How you evolve is by the quality with which you deal with it. That's what's really important. It's how you deal with it. The stuff that happens, that's not that important. Stuff just happens. You get to deal with it. Now, if that stuff that happens is mean, well, you have to deal with it. And you have to deal with it in as positive a way as you can. But you should be smart and try to not put yourself in the way of something that is like that. But if you happen to be there, then you deal with it with positivity. You deal with it in a low entropy way that lowers entropy for the system. Now, my system is not a pacifist system. It doesn't say, in all cases, just, turn the other cheek. There is a time that you can be violent, you can push back. And those times are when that violence and that pushing back actually lowers the entropy for the system. So that is a very rare case. Usually violence is a very poor response and makes everything worse. But there are those circumstances that you could imagine where it's time to stand up and say no more, or it's time to make a stand and say, no, I'm not joining that. I'm not doing that. I'm not being part of that, even though that has consequences. Well, it may have consequences in the material world that you don't like, but it has also consequences in the world of consciousness that you should like. It's helping you evolve. It's helping you grow up. And the way you deal with this negativity is that you realize that everybody is pretty much doing the best they can with what they've got. Now, what they've got, is what they've come in with their fear. If what they've got is fear and ego and beliefs, well, that's what they've got. And they're doing their best to grow up with that. They don't really know they're growing up, but they're struggling, and their struggle makes them unhappy. The struggle makes them miserable. And sometime when they get miserable enough, they turn around and go the other way. That's that dark night of the soul you were talking about. So, we don't seem to learn from things working out well for us. We seem to learn from pain, and we seem to be slow learners. But that pain that is caused, that dysfunction that is caused, becomes the impetus for learning, the impetus for growing. So if you look at all the people out there, and you realize a lot of them are in a control, power, force mentality, they're doing the best they can with what they've got. They need to evolve, but you can't make them evolve. You can't explain it to them, because you've tried to explain it to them, it'll just push them more resolutely into their dysfunction. So what you do is give them a space in which they can grow that more easily, and you try to help them see bigger pictures, but you don't push it on them. You don't lecture them. You don't tell them how and why they're wrong. You just lead them one little step at a time to see a little bit better picture, a little bigger picture than the one they have, and let that grow for a while until it takes hold, and help them a little more, because you have to do it gently, with care, and with love. You can't just beat people into submission and expect that's going to turn them into nice people. It doesn't. It makes them worse. So in that way, you can live in a very dysfunctional society and still be happy, still be having fun, still be growing and evolving. Stuff happens, you get to deal with it. Be smart, be aware of that stuff that's happening, and you may want to get out of the way if something nasty's coming your way. But if you can't help it and it comes your way anyway, deal with it. Now, what if it kills you? Well, that's not really a big deal. If it kills you, you're just going to recycle and come back and do it again. So what? It's just not a big deal that it kills you. So it grinds you up and makes you poor, and you end up living in some kind of little shack with a dirt floor. So what? It's not about how much stuff you have. It's about the quality of your consciousness. Some of my better friends have lived in little shacks with dirt floors, and they were just lovely people. And their families and their children were just lovely. They were beautiful people, very grown up. But economically, they were very poor. So it doesn't matter. You see, what comes your way isn't all that important. It's how you deal with it that's important. And the problem with us is, we humans, we put all our effort into making that stuff that happens be the way we want it. We try to manipulate everything. We try to make sure our kids grow up this way instead of that way, that they become doctors and lawyers, not artists and dancers. We try to get our spouse to, pick up their dirty clothes at night instead of throwing them in the floor. We try this and we try that. We manipulate everything. We try to manipulate the boss and the people at work and the coworkers to all end up doing things that we think are the best thing, not just for ourselves. Of course, we're not self-centered, but we know what the way things should be, the right way, the way it'd be best for everybody, and we try to manipulate that. And all of that is dysfunctional. You need to let it go. You need to be smart. Things happen as they happen. Now, being smart means that if somebody throws a rock at you, of course, you duck. You don't say, oh, well, they threw the rock. We'll just see what happens, and it hits you. Of course, you duck. That's what I mean by being smart. It's not just Pollyanna that you're out there, oh, it's all love and peace and everything will be fine. That's not helpful either. You have to be aware. You have to continually grow. Every choice you have to find a low entropy choice and do that. Whether that leads you up or down the ladder of success, you have to do that because that's your best choice. And the way it works is that if you do that, you will find peace, you will find satisfaction, you will find happiness. You will be living a very good, high-quality life. Whether it's in a one-room shack or whether it's in a mansion, doesn't make any difference. You'll be living a really good life. You will have learned a lot, and next time you evolve, you'll be a step higher. So a good life is one where you learn a lot. And that means probably you make a lot of mistakes because that's how you learn, is from making mistakes. So it's not a penalty to make a poor choice. It's a penalty not to learn from it. But again, the penalty is you get to do it again. That's the penalty. So that's how you live with that sort of thing. Instead of being angry at people, those people, they're ruining it for the rest of us. They're so dumb. We get angry and we swear and we get upset. But all that's dysfunctional. That makes you part of the problem, not part of the solution. So you deal with all of that stuff. Yes, go teach, go argue, go on shows, write to the editor, You don't have to sit home. Get out there, carry your sign out on a street corner, do whatever you feel you need to do that'll help, but do it in a positive way, not in a negative way, not in a confrontational way. And, we've had many people from Gandhi to Martin Luther King and others who have taught us that nonviolence is actually more powerful than violence. It's the same sort of thing. If you do the right thing for the right reason, it'll work out much better than if you're doing the wrong thing or doing it for the wrong reason. So this is not a thing that says there's never place for force. There is. But very judiciously do you ever use force, and it's always the very last option. And that force has to be a step toward a low entropy solution for everybody. For the system, I should say, not necessarily for everybody, but for the system.
That greater good. It's interesting, just feeling into Gandhi as a symbol there because of the ahimsa. Like there's a very big, like the nonviolence is a lot of intention around. It's so easy to violently engage and yet to then consciously make a choice to be non-violent because you mentioned the word Pollyanna, and that was going to be like, I think some people would be like, oh, well then, it gets a bit Pollyanna, but actually no, there's a certain application that is required of the individual to choose, right? And that's that sacred choice that you
absolutely. Absolutely. If what you choose to do is say, well, nothing really makes any difference, let's just go party. Well, you may not be part of the problem, but you're not part of the solution either. So that's not the right solution. You have to be actively part of the solution. You have to be making those choices so that when it's all the changes that choice made for all the different people that it affected, that you have the sum total is a lower entropy. That's what you're trying to do. So now some people, what you do may actually make them angry. So you say, well, that was high entropy. But maybe there's 10 others that they learn and they grow from it. Well, the sum total of that is a lower entropy. So it doesn't mean that every thing that you touch and every decision you make doesn't affect, everybody to a positive way. That's too hard. You can't do that. You can't please all the people all the time. You can't do that. But you have to say that I have taken the low entropy choice, such that when all the dust settles, the entropy is now as low as it could be. All my other choices, when the dust settled, the result would have been higher entropy. That's the choice that you make, is the low entropy choice.
Tom, it's really interesting at this particular juncture in the conversation because you mentioned, just even, it's okay if you pass. There is a lot of fear associated with the dissolution of the individual and the self for many people, and that can be quite a high entropy sort of space to go into for so many individuals. And we've had a couple of really amazing Buddhist teachers on the podcast talking about the death, the bardos, the death process, and how the Buddhists are actively trying to cultivate, a quality of final thought that is so pristine that actually, and in the context of this conversation, it really starts to come in together for me, which is the quality of the thought being so low entropy, even at that final dissolution of self, and they then present the argument that dictates your trajectory out of this world, and then also the entry point back into this world. And so that's starting to come together for me really neatly. All of those conversations in this conversation. I mean, a couple of questions here, if you can do us the honor. Is that there is, for people that are literally could be transitioning. Some of those people listening to this podcast, it can be quite a lot to face. The entropy that's coming in with the dissolution of self. I mean, that's one question there. The other one is, where are we between lives?
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, I can answer all that. And sometimes when I talk about what happens when you die, people ask, well, how do you know what happens when you die? Well, the way that I know what happens when you die is really two basic ways. Well, one's the model. The model explains that too. But two different sets of experience. One, I have multiple times connected mind to mind with somebody who was dying and followed along with them as part of their awareness and their perspective through their death process. So I've gone through that myself, been aware of it, but I've also gone through it with, say, 4 or 5 other people. And you just experience what they experience because you have you've connected to their mind and what they feel and think, you feel and think.
So shared death experience.
I've done that. So you can go with people as they die and kind of follow along and see what happens. Now, the other one was when I was much younger, the larger conscious, well, it still does this. The larger conscious system often puts me places where I'm to learn something, like the done reality I mentioned. It has given me a job. This was a long time ago. It gave me a job in what I call the transition reality. It's another virtual reality. It doesn't have a tight rule set like this one, so it's not real physical. It's more like a dream reality, actually, than here, but not exactly like a dream reality either. It's a little more solid than that, but not as solid as here. And I was sent to this transition reality to work, just to be there, to watch and see what happened. And of course, if you hang around, somebody will put you to work. So I had a job, and I was, with other people who were manning that transition reality, which is where people end up after they die. They go to this transition, virtual reality. So I kept going back there. When I get these lessons, they're like, I close my eyes and within seconds, I'm someplace else. It's like the system and there I am in the transition reality. And people who have just died are coming in, and I'm watching them being processed in and so on. And then I go back, and I probably went back every night to that reality for, 20, 30 times, like a month's worth of this. Every night you close your eyes, and you know what's going to happen. As soon as you close your eyes, bam, there you are in the transition reality. And, I was like a Walmart greeter, those old folks that stand inside the doors. Hello, welcome to Walmart. I was like one of those, except this was the transition reality.
Sorry, your sense of humor gets me every time. It's like, hello, welcome to the afterlife.
Yeah, something like that. So you follow people through it, and you get their vision of it as they progress through it. And then you see it from the other end as these people come to that reality. So you look at it from both ends. That's why I got those experiences. And what happens when you die? Well, first I should say that we talk just about a individuated unit of consciousness, but that individuated unit of consciousness takes a portion of itself and partitions it off, and I call that the free will awareness unit. Now, just like the larger consciousness system partitioned off a piece of itself, and we call that an individuated unit of consciousness, the individuated unit of consciousness can partition off a piece of itself. We call that the free will awareness unit. Now, that free will awareness unit is what logs on to the avatar. That free will awareness unit is the thing that begins a new life again. And it does that just with the degree of growth that it's done. How low is its entropy of its system, its IUOC. So it starts at that level. It doesn't always go back to zero. You start at whatever level you earned up to that time. All right, so this free will awareness unit then, as the person dies, they kind of wake up somewhere else, like Dorothy, we're no longer in Kansas, you're someplace else. And you kind of look around and aren't sure. But if you're not full of fear, if you have a religion that sells fear, then you may be very fearful. But if you don't, then you kind of look around like, oh, what's this? And at that point, you're usually either met by someone or you'll see your relatives that have already died or something, and they're not really your relatives. It's just an illusion that the larger conscious system is making, because the whole point of this system is to get you to relax and let go. And then your remembrance of the life that you just ended starts to fade, just like dreams fade. It's real clear at first few seconds, and then it gets foggier and foggier. And the whole idea of the transition reality is just to let a person kind of distract them and let them decompress from that last thing, let the dream go away, and now they come back. And there's various ways of doing that. Some of the most common ways are somebody will meet them. They'll say, oh, here's your Uncle George and so on, and your mother that died. And then you have this reunion, but it doesn't last long, like just a short time. And they all say, well, we need to leave now. You need to go through this process. And so that's just to get you to relax. And that's the larger conscious system playing those relatives so that you will relax and say, okay, everything's going to be fine here. Then they say, well, what you need to do, see that line, see the lady with the red dress, that line of people going up there? They're matriculating in. Your name's on that register. Go over and stand in that line. Now, there's no point in standing in any line. Nothing's really going on here. All they're doing is creating busy work for people to just hang out for a while, to let everything go, for them to relax, for them to kind of realize that now they're in a different space, in a different place. And what's the point of this place? Oh, well, the point is to grow. The point's to go find another situation where you can grow in. So if you need counseling, you'll go to counseling. If you don't need a review, you skip the review. It's different for every person. It depends on what they need. If you have evolved quite a bit and you understand these things, you don't need to go get in the line. You don't need to do anything. You just progress right to the place where you start planning and negotiating your next incarnation, and who you might want to do it with, and what you're going to try to learn, and the kind of circumstances that would challenge you most, and that sort of thing. So people who are not that well developed yet, they go stand in line as just a thing to produce boredom, so they'll let everything go and start to wonder about, well, what's next? So when they get to that point, somebody will come along and say, well, what would you like to do? What's next? Now, at that time, as soon as that body dies, that partition between the individuated unit of consciousness and the free will awareness unit starts to dissolve. So very quickly, as the memories go and everything, that free will awareness unit just returns to the individuated unit of consciousness. It just becomes a part of it again. That individuated unit of consciousness is the accumulator of experience. It accumulates the experience, where the free will awareness unit has the experience, but the individuated unit of consciousness accumulates that experience, and it can look at that experience and say, well, let's see, the last 25 times you incarnated, you had this kind of problem. So let us pick something for you where you can specifically work on that problem.
Is that your own soul and spirit that people refer to?
Yeah,
or is that a different?
No, think of, you are the individuated unit of consciousness, but what's actually logged on to play the avatar is just a piece of that. It's the free will awareness unit. It's just a piece of the individuated unit of consciousness, which is a piece of the larger consciousness system. These are all just subsets. It's the same way that works. So you have that individuated unit of consciousness, and that looks at the whole. It can look at all of your experiences, and it can look at all of those and help you decide what would be in your best interest to do next. Or if you're more grown, it'll decide how you can best help others grow. If it's not so much the things that you have to overcome, it may be, where can you fit into where you will be, part of the solution for other people? And it takes these things into consideration. So that's what happens. So you die, you find yourself someplace else. Entities there will meet you and greet you and make you feel relaxed. They'll give you something totally boring to do that's non-functional, so that you can just relax and decompress and let your mind wander a bit. You'll come to a point where you're wondering what's going to happen next and what you're going to be doing. Then you get passed off to someone that will help you decide that. You may do a life review. If you're one of the younger souls, you might, because these younger souls will say, oh, I was perfect. The only reason I had problems was other people. Other people caused all my problems. I'm not mean. I don't get upset, but these other people made me upset, So then they do a little life review.
You're pointing out my own immaturities. Ouch.
Exactly. They do a little life review, and all these little vignettes of you flying off the handle, going nuts and everything. And then you say, oh, yeah, well, I guess I do have a little problem there. So that helps. But now if you're not in that situation, if you have a low entropy, then you don't necessarily have to do that. You just figure out, how can I help best? Where can I go where I'm going to be a valuable part of the solution? What do I need to learn? What things have I not yet tried? What are the new things that I haven't yet interacted with? I've been male, I've been female, I've been rich, I've been poor, I've been this race and that race and all sorts of other things. I've been in the armies, I've been, out in the fields. I've done all these things. What's new? What are the new things that I can experience? Because new things cause you to have new choices. And the more new choices you have, the more likely you are to grow. So that's part of it as well. So then you get to this point where you're ready to go back, and the system says, okay, we found a good spot for you. It'll do this. This will give you a good chance to, succeed. And then they always ask you, is that okay? Do you accept that? And you can say no, and they'll find something else. Or you might ask questions about it, and they'll give you answers. But most people just say, sure, and off you go. Then your individuated unit of consciousness puts in another petition, creates another little free will awareness unit that has none of the memory, but all the quality, sends it back in for another experience. So that's what happens when you die. That's the cycle you go through. Now, that's very simple. That's not a lot of structure. That's not a lot of, you do this and then you go through the green door and then you have to do other things, and you go through the red door. And it's not a lot of structure to it. It's just that simple. It depends on where you are, how much help you need, depends on how much you get. Now, it's generally a pretty easy process for most people. It's only very few people that have a difficulty with the process. And those few people are the people who are obsessed with some sort of fear. They're the ones that are maybe very religious, and they know that they've been bad little girls and bad little boys, and that maybe this isn't going to be so good, and they come with a lot of fear. They take a little more time and trouble. But in general, it's just that simple. You just wake up, you move toward the light or toward the beckoning hand, which always has a big smile and a happy greeting, just like the Walmart greeter. They're always very nice. Hello, yeah. Welcome, come on. This is good. You'll like this here. Everything's
Welcome
nice
back
here.
to the Earth School.
Yeah, so that's just to relax you. That's just to make you, okay, now what? And like I say, the previous life just fades like a dream fades. It's not very long before that's gone, and you have no more concerns about that. So that's how it works. Then you go get another one, start over again. Now you have all the quality, but none of the intellect, none of the knowledge. And that's required because if you brought back memories of previous incarnations, you wouldn't grow up very much because you'd always be gaming the system. You'd always say, I know what the right answer is in this situation. Okay, I'll be kind and I'll help the little old lady across the street. But now you're acting, you're not being. And that's not helpful to your growth. Civilizing for the people around you, but not helpful for your growth. Well, maybe it is helpful a little bit, but it's not the step forward that you need to take. So you need to be different, which means you have to make real choices out of your core, out of who you are. You help that little old lady because you feel compelled to do that. You just want to do that because this little old lady is having a hard time here in that busy street, and you have compassion for her, so you're going to help her. That's a good choice. Helping her because you know that will give you 3 gold stars for helping the little old lady. That doesn't give you much. So
gives you the opportunity.
They want all of your choices to be choices from the core, to just be an expression of who you are. That's why you don't come back with any intellectual information. Otherwise, you would be gaming the system. You wouldn't just make choices out of who you are. And matter of fact, we're talking about just who you are. That's one of the great things about the dream reality, because when you're dreaming, you make choices just out of who you are. Those choices you make in a dream, if you make terrible choices in a dream, that's you. You can make those kind of terrible choices. So that's the real you in the dream reality. You're not aware making intellectual choices unless you're in a lucid dream. If you're in a lucid dream, now that's different. Now, you can act. But if you're in a normal dream, your choices are yours and you own them. So that's what happens when you die. It's a very simple process. It's not the same for everybody. It depends on where you are in the evolution of consciousness, It could be lengthier if you need a lot of time to calm down and get over fears. It can be very short if you know what's going on and you don't need any hand holding. But that's how it works. And like I say, I've seen both ends of it, and it always is something similar to that. I kind of condensed it. I mean, it's different for everyone, but when people do the near-death experience, it's the same thing. They find themselves out. They're no longer in Kansas like Dorothy. They're out there, and they're like, where am I? What's going on? Kind of a thing. But there's still a probability that's fairly high that their body is going to be resuscitated. Because remember, that's a virtual body with virtual doctors lying on a virtual table in a virtual reality, and the system knows what the future probabilities are. So it knows that there's a high probability that resuscitation is coming. So what the system will do, if this is a person who is likely to be very valuable in helping other people learn, then the system will give that person a view of reality from the mind of the larger consciousness system. It's the same thing the yogis do. It's the same kind of experience that you get in samadhi, which is not a hard experience to have. You can have it when you want to, but it's really a mind opener and a mind blower for these people who they're given that for a reason, and that's because they are the kind of person who will come back, tell everybody about it, write a book that another 500,000 people will read, and it just cracks open the minds of humanity a little bit. So all of those events where they kind of get that experience, the being one with the larger consciousness system, that's a gift to them so that they will spread that word and help open people's minds. And it's just given to them. Whether they actually were ready to earn that or not isn't the point. The point is they're going to come back and they're going to be all excited and they're going to tell everybody they know and probably write a book and join a club that talks about those kinds of things. So they become seekers. It turns them from a control, power, force materialist into a seeker of spiritual understanding. So that's what's happening. So they are, you can say, having an out of body, you might say, but the body will be resuscitated. So they must go back. And it's not that the bad beings say, no, I know you want to stay. I know you like it better here, but you're going to have to go back. It's not that those beings are mean and overriding their free will. It's that their body isn't going to die long enough to kill them. It may die for a few seconds, but it's going to come back. So they can't stay because their body's going to come back. Their body's going to need that piece of consciousness to make its choices. So they have to go back. It's not that they're forced back. It's just that their body revives and that sucks them back into that situation.
Back into the space-time. Yeah. One of the this sacred veil of forgetfulness that's placed upon us, really interesting because, like you said, it's, it makes the experience and the choices visceral for the individual. But it does seem to be at this particular moment in time, or maybe just media is more expanded. So maybe I'm, in this space of the Inspired Evolution podcast having more of these conversations, but it does seem to be that more and more people are remembering past lives, that they're able to have pre-birth cognition to some degree, or, and near-death experiences. Sure. There seems to be more and more of this happening. Is this potentially a symptom? Am I conflating things by asking you this? How you said we were moving towards this asymptotic sort of trajectory. Is that a hallmark of potentially that we are getting lower entropy?
Absolutely, it is. That's what happens as people, we start to grow up faster. So, like I say, the first, out of the 200,000, the first 195,000 years were all pretty much control, power, force, warlord mentality. The powerful abused the weak. And, 500 years ago, that started to change, and maybe even 1,000 years ago, it started to change, but it would come and go. And, we've had the Industrial Revolution took about 125 years to completed cycle. And we learned a lot during that time. You know, when it first started back in 1800, children were being abused and chained to their machines to make sure they'd show up in the morning. And Asians were being kidnapped in Asia and brought over to California to help build the railroads. And there was some Industrial Revolution had some pretty nasty aspects to it, but we outgrew that. You know, that didn't continue. We outgrew it, and we ended up taming most of its, you know, worst attributes. So that's us growing up over time. And like I said, century by century, you can see that we're leveling up a little bit. And now we're on that part where it starts to get faster. But that's what they call the knee of the curve. It doesn't just come here and then go straight up. It's that curve. We're right there. And that's why a lot more people are interested. That's why consciousness is now a big topic of conversation. When I published my books back in 2003, you couldn't find anybody that gave a damn about consciousness. Consciousness? Who cares? What's that? Yeah, we all got it. So what? You know, there was no, there was nobody. It was me and Fredkin and English, Bosma, who thought that virtual reality was maybe a good idea, but most everybody else thought it was crazy. But as time goes on, and as we, quantum mechanics went on and learned more, had more experiments, and they got more and more convinced that this was an information-based reality, and things are just moving. They're all coming together. They're all coming together now at a time when, because of the internet, we now have humanity as almost a family rather than humanity spread all over the planet. And the people here couldn't care less about what happens to the people over there because that's so far away, it's not even real to them. So now that's not the case. If somebody has an earthquake and you take a picture of little children crying and stuff, and all the rest of the world gets to see that up close and personal. And that affects people. So we tend to be increasing our sense of caring for others. We're seeing firsthand the kind of destructive control, power, force things that are around us. Sometimes you have to take 2 steps backward before you can go forward. Sometimes to see the dysfunction has to get worse and worse until it causes you pain. And then, oh, okay, now I get it. That's a bad direction. We don't want to do that. So, you can't just judge it by the moment. You have to look at it in the bigger picture.
Hey guys, Tom's mentioning the internet and family and just how globally we're all coming online together. Here at the Inspired Evolution, we have a space called the Inspired Evolution Circle, affectionately known as the Inspired Circle. You can join us online, inspiredevolution.com/circle. At the time of this recording, to celebrate hitting 250,000 subscribers, we're giving away access to the circle. So please do use the link in the description below and join us on the inside where we're discussing the themes from these podcasts such as this. Guests like Tom come on once a month to greet us and have conversations where I step out of the way. You as the audience get to ask your questions directly with people like Tom. Once a week we gather, we meditate together, we have community offerings. There's a lot of good juju, touchwood, even in-person gatherings happening all around the place. So yeah, come join the inside circle of the Inspired Evolution. Come meet us there. So yeah, be part of the family online and in person. Links inspiredevolution.com/circle and also at the top of the description below. Back to Tom.
But in the general, we're moving forward faster. And that's why consciousness now has become a bigger thing. We're starting to get to the point where, people are looking for that other dimension that is more meaningful than just materialism. And they need to find it, but not necessarily in dogma or in, a structured answer. They need to find it for themselves out of their own experience. They need to find something that's logical and straightforward that they can work with. It's not a matter of belief. Belief is the enemy. We want to get rid of belief. If you believe something, that just limits your decision space. I believe that it's this way. Then when the evidence comes in that it's that way, you just throw it away because you've got to believe that it's this way. So belief is a limitation. You need to always be open and think in terms of probability rather than probability being have to be a 1 or a 0. This is true. That isn't. Now you say that's a 1, that's a 0. Most things are not 1s or 0s. You may get a 0.9 or a 0.9999 or a 0.0001, but most things can't be 1s and 0s because we don't know enough. We don't have enough experience to make that kind of an accurate decision or judgment. There's a lot of things we don't know. So what do? We make up a story, and then we believe it. And then that becomes a fact. Because anybody has a belief, that belief turns into a fact.
Myth.
In that person's mind, that belief is a fact. And once it's a fact, new information just gets thrown out. So beliefs are a part of the problem. Ego is a part of the problem. And as people look for solutions that aren't fear-based, a lot of religion tends to be fear-based. That isn't fear-based, and it isn't ego-based, and it isn't belief-based, then they'll find something real that's real for them, that they can experience, and it can become a part of them. And they grow up. Why? Not because everybody else is doing it, because it's right. Because it's right for them, because it makes them feel good. Because when they're nice to people and caring and helpful, they feel better. They're happier. You get happiness is not something you can go get. Happiness is a byproduct of a life of good choices. That's what happiness is. So it all pulls together in kind of
really
one
does.
big thing that makes sense. Now, I have people come up to me and say, Tom, are you a Tibetan Buddhist? I've been studying Tibetan Buddhism for 20 years, and you sound just like them. And I say, no, I'm not. And come up and say, well, I'm a Hindu, or I'm a this, or I'm a that, or I'm even the shaman come up, the shaman that run as the wolves and fly with the eagles, They say, you sound just like a shaman, my teacher tells me all the same kind of things that you do. So it's kind of universal because there is only one truth, but there's literally many thousands of ways to approach that truth. And every approach uses its own metaphors and its own symbols and its own stories, and that's okay. We don't need just one path for everybody to be, marshaled into one path. It's good that there are thousands of paths, but we all need to pull together and not fight over my path's better than your path. My path is truer than your path, That's dysfunctional. We have to all kind of join together, and if we do, I think in another decade, maybe 2, the scientists will embrace this theory as a better physics. And when they do, they are what I call the high priests of Western culture. The high priest's job is to tell everybody else what to believe. And the physicists now, or the scientists, are the high priests of Western culture. They tell everybody else what's true. And if they say, yes, this is the first reality, and you're here to grow up, to become love, if they even buy into just a piece of it, all the rest of it will fall in behind it. And when that happens, it goes mainstream. And a decade after that, our whole culture will be different. We will have shifted from control, power, force to caring, sharing, and helping. So that's could happen in just a couple of decades. So that's that fast part of the curve. But it could be that we make a lot of terrible choices and we go backwards for the next 20 years before we start going forwards again. That's a possibility too. So you just do the best you can, and it falls out however it does, and evolution just keeps chugging. And the good news is that we will eventually get there, because that is the positive direction of consciousness evolution. And no matter how many setbacks there are, the evolution will just start chugging forward again. And one day it'll get to that point where the majority of us are peaceful, caring, happy citizens that care more about each other than we care about ourselves. And that will be a beautiful world to live in. So that's where this is all going. But for it to get there, I think to get in the mainstream, it needs to have a logical scientific structure in which it fits. Because, the Buddha understood everything that I understand. It's not that I come with a whole different story, but I'm packaging it in metaphors that are more understandable for people today. Is it one way to look at it? It's getting repackaged, and the same with all those other religions, and so all the mystical schools of all the religions all kind of have the same idea. They all come to about the same conclusions. It's the non-mystical part of it that fight with each other all the time, but the mystical traditions all kind of come out with the same thing. Love is the answer. That's the bottom line. So there we are. That's the idea. That's where I'm hoping to go with it. It does provide a logical scientific structure in which all the religions, the philosophies, the scientists, everybody can kind of fit their piece in. So it's the theists in my group that kind of follows me. The theists there see the larger conscious system as God. That's God. So now they have a derivation of God, and they know what God is and how it works and how it evolved and so on. And the atheists among them say, see, I knew it all along. There is no God. There's just this larger consciousness system. And it's a real thing. It's finite. It doesn't know everything all the time. It doesn't have all these godly magical attributes. It's just the larger conscious system. It's an information system, see? So the atheists and the theists all get together fine because they all can live with the same logic. They can all find themselves in there. So that's the idea, something that's universal, that everybody can see. Yeah, I was in India. I gave 2 lectures in India. I don't remember exactly where anymore, and I probably could never have pronounced the names in the first place, but I gave 2 lectures, and it was really very, very nice. It was well received, well accepted, and it was a lot of fun being there. I've never seen so many cars all on one street in my life. I've never been on a city street that had 18 lanes going one way and another 18 lanes going the other way.
It's a high entropy.
It's
a very high entropy environment. but my granddad used to say to me, may he rest in peace, he used to say, I'm going to look around. There's rubbish here, there's people sleeping here, there's everything's strewn everywhere, 8 lanes to a car, no organized, no chaos. And he goes, and people come here to find God. And I was like, yeah, they do. And he goes, because in order for all of this to work, there really must be a God.
Absolutely. There must be an organizing principle, which is entropy reduction. Yes, indeed.
Yeah.
I enjoyed my visit to India.
Oh, thank you. I've enjoyed your visit to our podcast today. Everything you just shared about the big theory of everything, and just how, the religions and the interstitial space and all the different beliefs, and even just the beliefs and how, their design. Yeah. This conversation feels so important for me, and I feel really honored to be able to share it with everyone, primarily because, there is this greater sense of harmony that is one of the ideals that the inspired evolution is, striving towards to, and I feel like this conversation really holds a lot of space for that. So, yeah, I mean, my final question was going to be, why does reality exist? Why is this happening? But you've already spoken to it, all through
absolutely.
The podcast. Lower entropy, greater love, the chaos and the order, and love as being the great organizer and the great, ordering force, the highest order. I mean, yeah, I genuinely cannot thank you enough for your time, Tom. We covered ground that I didn't even expect to cover, and there's so much ground still left to uncover. But sincerely, I genuinely thank you for your time here today. And yet, as you've mentioned, your life's work is your life's work that we're reveling in here, and also, then some as well, as you've been, sneak peeking us into in certain corners, and I'd love to discuss them further again if you'd be willing to come back on the podcast. But yeah, thank you so much for this incredible conversation today, and also for you doing the work that you're doing, the way that you're doing it, and who you are at the moment in time. Thank you.
Well, I thank you for the work you're doing at the time. Knowledge and understanding is a wonderful thing, but shared knowledge and understanding is so much better. So that's the point. That's why you're here. That's why I'm here. It's not just to figure it out for ourselves, but it's to share with other people, to pass it on, to help other people see a bigger picture, that there is a logical structure behind all of this chaos and all of the cars and all the chaos and all the cattle in the street. There is some order and chaos to it. It's going someplace, and it's working. We are evolving, so we can evolve more quickly or more slowly. It's our choices, but we're going to get there one way or another. And it takes all of us. People have experiences, and they can't really explain the experiences, so they make up a story. And that story says, well, it was this way, and that way. And then eventually, they know it's a story when they make it up, but a year later, it's a fact. It's the way it is. And that's where dogma comes from. It's people's stories to explain what their experience is. Well, the good thing about this model is that there is no dogma. There's nothing you have to believe. There's no things you have to do. There's no rituals to be performed. And everybody needs to find their own toe in their own way, in their own time, because that's the only way it works. The only thing that anybody can do is change themselves. You're not in a position to change anything else but yourself. So your gift to the rest of humanity is to grow up, get rid of your fear, get rid of your ego, get rid of your beliefs, and that will be your ultimate gift to the rest of humanity. So that's very simple. That's not a hard concept, to grok. That's a simple idea. That's your mission. That's what you're here for, is to do that, to be part of the solution, not part of the problem. And it's so much easier to succeed at that when you know what the game is that you're playing, rather than just wandering around in a playing field totally clueless to what the game is. So that's why you and I get together and we talk. We help people see what the game is, and how do you win this game? Well, you win it by becoming love. That's how you win the game. You don't win it by having $1 billion in the bank. Matter of fact, that may be a sure loss. Depends on how you have intention around that. So there's no things that are, it's awful to be a billionaire. No, it's not awful to be a billionaire. It's not awful to be poor. It just is a condition. And whenever condition you're in, you just do the best you can to make low entropy choices, and you'll come out the other side ahead, and your life will be fun and happy and productive. So it doesn't get any simpler than that. It's just that easy. And everything falls out. Everything. And when you get on that path, you've probably discovered this too because you've been on this path, everything falls at your feet just as you need it. If there's something you really, really need to grow and take the next step, it will appear right in front of you just at the time that you need to have it. So reality works that way. The system will go out of its way to help you grow up. The system isn't just sitting there, not part of what's going on. It's a part of what's going on, but it won't overrun your free will. But if you're a person who's trying to grow up, the system will go out of its way to help you. It will give you synchronicities that just happen. It will give you ideas that just work. If you need something to take the next step, that something will appear. It just will work for you as long as it can stay in the shadows and have plausible deniability to everybody else. So all you have to do is get serious, and you'll get all the help you can use. That's all it takes. It's just a simple change of attitude. Simple.
Yeah. I remember tuning into some of your work prior to the podcast, and even just the way you said, even the way we see our synchronicities, they're programmed perfectly for our receptivity for them. And actually, we can always recode even how we would like to receive those synchronicities and hallmarks and little messages from the universe to our most optimal, back to, I guess, where the podcast started with, you seeing those red lines of code, that was perfect for you. And everybody has their own markers. And I mean, I've had people on the podcast with, I'd like to see a feather, and a feather appears, and it's like, boom, exactly what you're calling in, just reminding people of their agency and the choice at the end of the day.
Yeah.
Can I ask, just before we dive into the episode, is the toe on the front cover your toe?
No, the toe on the front cover
Dang it!
is not my toe. It was something, some artist came up with that, and I thought it was very clever. But it makes the translation difficult, because in other languages, English has TOE as theory of everything, but theory of everything in other languages does not come out TOE. So it makes for a
computational error.
So,
got it.
Yeah, well, the my in my big toe wasn't because I was so proud of it, is I just wanted people to realize that that's based on my experience. Mm-hmm. And if it's not your experience, it can't be your truth. If you just believe it, then it's somebody else's truth that you're believing. So it has to be your experience to be your truth. So that's my big toe. You need to create your own big toe with your own experience. That's why I offer those courses on doing the paranormal, because though the paranormal itself is really not all that important, it makes a good exercise to learn the things you need to learn to grow up. You have to learn to discipline your mind, be awake and entirely awake, not in a foggy state, but be entirely, completely awake in some other reality than this one. And to be okay, that doesn't freak you out or it doesn't cause a strong emotional reaction, because that will bring you right back.
Inspired soul, lumen beings, you made it through to the end of another really incredible episode. Touch wood, even if I can say so myself, this episode is just so much inspired evolution. It's all about evolution, inspired evolution. I feel so honored right now to be your brother walking this conscious path by your incredible side. I want to take a moment to remind you, if you like this video, please do hit the thumbs up and the like. It lets everything on the internet know that conversations like this are important and you'd like to see more of this uplifting frequency online. And also to all of you that are subscribed to the podcast, thank you so much. Guests like Tom agree to come on the podcast due to the size of the platform that you guys are all contributing to. This is all your hard work as well as ours. It's totally a co-creation. Thank you so much for your contribution, your love, and your support by hitting subscribe to the channel. Thank you, thank you, thank you. To all of you that haven't yet subscribed, please do take a moment. As I said, it helps with everything we're doing, championing love, positivity, and wisdom around the planet. As I'm saying the word subscribe, the button below is lighting up in the colors of the Inspired Evolution. Please hit that subscribe button, hit the bell notification icon, and join the community, join the movement. Thank you so much in advance for your support. Now, to continue your Inspired Evolution onwards, upwards, and inwards, on screen now, an opportunity for you to dive in even deeper. Dr. Raymond Moody has been studying near-death experiences for over 50 years. He coined the term near-death experience. You can tune into that episode here and the incredible insights and wisdoms that he's got from that space. We talked a little bit around the afterlife here today as well. Andrew Holchek is a Tibetan Buddhist and master who talks a lot about the bardos and the afterlife and what happens from a very spiritual perspective. It was really incredible to marry in all those insights from Tom today into Andrew's awareness. So you might want to check that one out as well. And also an episode here for you to tune in and just take your Inspired Evolution further. So go on, take your pick, make your click. I will see you in the next one. Go on. I'll see you there.